Good afternoon, my grandchildren. It's a beautiful afternoon, the sun's shining, and here in Oklahoma anyway, it's a pretty nice day. And we hope that you have a nice day where you are, whether it be in Arizona or Kentucky or Missouri or where you're listening to Grandpa read stories. We're ready for the egg sack, where Charlotte has been talking to Wilbur about what's coming up for her, and they're at the fair. And Wilbert's Zuckerman's famous pig, and Charlotte has stowed away in a knothole, and Templeton is there with them, and they're ready for the fair. The next morning, when first light came into the sky, and the sparrows stirred in the trees, and the cows rattled their chains, and the rooster crowed, and the early automobiles went whispering along the road, Wilbur awoke and looked for Charlotte. He saw her up overhead in a corner near the back of his pen. She was very quiet. Her 8 legs were spread wide. She seemed to have shrunk during the night. Next to her, attached to the ceiling, Wilbur saw a curious object. It was sort of a sack or a cocoon it was peach-colored. It looked as though it were made of cotton candy. "Are you awake, Charlotte? Are you awake?" he said softly. "Yes," came the answer. "What is that nifty little thing? Did you make it?" "I did indeed," replied Charlotte in a weak voice. "Is it a plaything?" "Plaything? I should say not. It's my egg sack, my magnum opus." "I don't know what magnum opus is," said Wilbur. "Well, it's Latin," explained Charlotte. "It means great work. This egg sack is my great work. The finest thing that I've ever made." "Well, what's inside it?" asked Wilbur. "Eggs. 514 of them," she replied. 514? said Wilbur. "You are kidding." No, I'm not. I counted them. I got started counting, so I just kept on. So just to keep my mind occupied, I counted all of them. "It's a perfectly beautiful egg sack," said Wilbur, feeling as happy as he thought he had constructed it himself. "Yes, it is very pretty," replied Charlotte, patting the sack with her 2 front legs. "Anyway, I can guarantee that it is strong. It is made out of the toughest material that I have. It is also waterproof. The eggs are inside, and they will be warm and they will be dry." "Charlotte," said Wilbur dreamily, "are you really going to have 514 children?" "Well, if nothing happens, yes. That is what I'm supposed to have," she said. "Of course, they won't show up till next spring." Wilbur noticed that Charlotte's voice sounded sad. "What makes you sound so downhearted? I should think you'd be terribly happy about this." Oh, don't pay any attention to me," said Charlotte. "I just don't have much pep anymore. I guess I feel sad because I will never see my children." "What do you mean, never see them? What do you mean? Of course you will. We'll all see them. It's going to be simply wonderful next spring in the barn and in the cellar with 514 baby spiders running around all over the place, and the geese will have a new set of goslings, and the sheep will have their new lambs, and..." "Well, maybe," said Charlotte quietly. "However, I have a feeling I'm not going to see the results of last night's efforts. I don't feel good at all. I think I'm languishing. To tell you the truth, I'm languishing." Wilbur didn't understand the word languish, and he hated to bother Charlotte with asking her to explain it, but he was worried, and he felt he had to ask. "What does languishing mean?" "It means I'm slowing up, feeling my age. I'm not young anymore, Wilbur. But I don't want you to worry about me. This is your big day. Look at my web. Doesn't it show up well with the dew on it?" Charlotte's web never looked more beautiful than it looked this morning. Each strand held dozens of bright drops of early morning dew, and the light from the east struck it and made it all plain and clear. It was a perfect piece of designed workmanship and building. In another hour or two, a steady stream of people would pass by, admiring it and reading it and looking at Wilbur and marveling at the miracle. As Wilbur was studying the web, and a pair of whiskers of sharp face appeared, Slowly, Templeton dragged himself across the pen and threw himself down in a corner. "I'm back," he said in a husky voice. "What a night." The rat was swollen to twice his normal size, and his stomach was as big and round as a jelly jar. Look at Templeton. He just got back from his night of scrounging. "What a night," he repeated hoarsely. "What feasting, carousing, a real gorge. I must have eaten the remains of 30 lunches. Never have I seen such leavings, and everything, well ripened, seasoned with the passage of time and the heat of the day, and oh, it was so rich, my friends, so rich." "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Charlotte in disgust. "I would serve you right if you had an acute attack of indigestion." "Don't worry about my stomach," snarled Templeton. "It can handle anything. And by the way, I've got some bad news. As I came up past that pig next door, the one that calls himself Uncle, I noticed a blue tag on the front of his pen. That means he's won first prize. I guess you're licked, Wilbur. You might as well relax. Nobody's going to hang any medals on you. Furthermore, I wouldn't be surprised if Zuckerman changes his mind about you. Wait till he gets the hankering for some fresh pork and smoked ham and crisp bacon. He'll take the knife to you, my boy." "Be still, Templeton," said Charlotte. "You're too stuffed and bloated to know what you're saying. Don't pay any attention to him, Wilbur." Wilbur tried not to think about what the rat had just said. He decided maybe be best just to change the subject. "Templeton," said Wilbur, "if you weren't so dopey, you would have noticed that Charlotte has made an egg sac. She's going to become a mother. And, for your information, there are 514 eggs in that peachy egg sac." "Is this true?" asked the rat, eyeing the sack suspiciously. "Yes, it's true," sighed Charlotte. "Well, congratulations, then," murmured Templeton. "This has been a night." He closed his eyes, pulled some straw over himself, and dropped off into a deep sleep. Wilbur and Charlotte were glad to be rid of him for a little while. At 9 o'clock, Mr. Arable's truck rolled into the fairgrounds and came up to a stop at Wilbur's pen. Everybody climbed out. "Look," cried Fern, "look at Charlotte's Web. Look what it says." The grown-ups and the children joined hands and stood there studying the new sign. "Humble," said Mrs. Zuckerman. Now isn't that just a word for Wilbur? Everyone rejoiced to find that the miracle of the web had been repeated, and Wilbur gazed up lovingly into their faces. He looked very humble and very grateful, and Fern winked to Charlotte, and Luby soon got busy. He poured a bucket of warm slops into the trough, and while Wilbur ate his breakfast, Luby scratched him gently with a smooth stick. "Wait a minute," cried Avery. "Wait a minute. Look at this." He pointed to the blue tag on Uncle's pen. "This pig has won first prize already." The Zuckermans and the Araballs stared at the tag. Mrs. Zuckerman began to cry. Nobody said a word. They were just staring at the tag. Then they stared at Uncle. Then they stared at the tag again. Luby took out an enormous handkerchief and blew his nose very loudly. So loud, in fact, that the noise was heard by stable boys over at the horse barn. "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "I want to go out to the Midway." "You stay right where you are," said her mother. Tears came to Fern's eyes. "What's everybody crying about?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Let's get busy. Edith, bring me some buttermilk." Mrs. Zuckerman wiped her eyes with her handkerchief, and she went to the truck and came back with a gallon jar full of buttermilk. "Bath time," said Zuckerman cheerfully, and he and Mrs. Zuckerman and Avery climbed into Wilbur's pen, and Avery slowly poured buttermilk on Wilbur's head and back, and as it trickled down around his sides and his cheeks, Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman rubbed it into his hair and skin, and passers-by stopped to watch. Pretty soon, quite a crowd had gathered. Wilbur grew beautifully white and smooth, and the morning sun just shone through his pink ears. Oh, can't turn the page. The morning sun shone through his pink ears. "He isn't as big as that pig next door," said one of the bystanders, "but he's cleaner. That's what I like. So do I, said another man. He's humble, too, said a woman reading the sign on the web. Everybody who visited the pig pen had a good word to say about Wilbur, and everyone admired the web, and, of course, nobody even noticed Charlotte. Suddenly, a voice was heard on the loudspeaker. Attention, attention, please. Will Mr. Homer Zuckerman bring his famous pig to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand? A special award will be made there in 20 minutes. Everyone is invited to attend. Crate your pig, please, Mr. Zuckerman, and report to the judge's booth promptly. For a moment after this announcement, the Arbills and the Zuckermans were just standing there looking at each other. They didn't say anything. They were unable to speak or move. Then Avery picked up a handful of straw and threw it high in the air and gave a loud yell. The straw fluttered down like confetti into Fern's hair, and Mr. Zuckerman hugged Mrs. Zuckerman, and Mr. Arable kissed Mrs. Arable, and Avery kissed Wilbur, and Louvie shook hands with Annie and everybody that was there, and Fern hugged her mother, and Avery hugged Fern, and Mr. and Mrs. Arable hugged Mrs. Zuckerman, and up overhead in the shadows of the ceiling, Charlotte crouched unseen. Her front legs were encircling her egg sac, and her heart was not beating as strongly as usual, and she felt very old and very weak. She felt weary, but she was sure, at last, she had saved Wilbur's life, and she felt peaceful and contented with that. We have no time to lose, shouted Mr. Zuckerman. Louvie, help with the crate. Can I have some money? Asked Fern. You wait, said Mrs. Arable. Can't you see everyone is busy? Pitch in and help with something. Put that empty buttermilk jar into the truck, commanded Mr. Arable. Avery grabbed the jar and rushed to the truck. Does my hair look all right? Asked Mrs. Zuckerman. It looks fine, said Mr. Zuckerman as he and Louvie set the crate down in front of Wilbur. You didn't even look at my hair, said Mrs. Zuckerman. You're all right, Edith, said Mrs. Arable. Just keep calm. Templeton, asleep in the straw, heard the commotion and woke up. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but he saw the men coming with the crate and shoving Wilbur into the crate, and he made up his mind to get out of the way. So he watched his chance, and when no one was looking, he crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw at the bottom. Here's a picture of the Zuckermans hugging each other, and Avery jumping up on his hands, and everybody happy that they were called to the judge's grandstand. He walked for his chance, and when no one was looking, he crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw at the bottom. All ready, boys, said Mr. Zuckerman. Let's go. He and Mr. Arable and Louvie and Avery grabbed up the crate and boosted it over to the side of the pen and up into the truck, and Fern jumped on board and sat on top of the crate. She still had straw in her hair and looked very pretty and excited. Mr. Arable started the motor, and everyone climbed in, and off they went, going to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand. As they passed the Ferris wheel, Fern gazed up at it and wished she were up there on the upmost car with Henry Fusty at her side. Chapter 20, The Hour of Triumph. Special announcement, said the loudspeaker in a pompous voice. The management of the fair takes great pleasure in presenting Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman and his famous pig. The truck bearing this extraordinary animal is now approaching the infield. Kindly stand back and give the truck room to proceed. In a few moments, the pig will be unloaded in the special judging ring in front of the grandstand, where a special award will be made. Will the crowd please make way? Make way. Let the truck pass. Thank you. Wilbur trembled when he heard this speech. He felt happy, but he felt dizzy. The truck crept along slowly in low speed. Crowds of people surrounded it, and Mr. Arable had to drive very carefully in order not to hit anybody. At last, he managed to reach the judge's stand. Avery jumped out and lowered the tailgate. I'm scared to death, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Hundreds of people they're looking at us. Cheer up, replied Mrs. Arable. This is supposed to be fun. Unload your pig, please, said the loudspeaker. All together now, boys, said Mr. Zuckerman. Several men stepped forward from the crowd and helped lift the crate, and Avery was the busiest helper of all. Tuck in your shirt, Avery, said Mrs. Zuckerman, and tighten your belt. Your pants are coming down. Can't you see I'm busy? Replied Avery in disgust as he was hanging on to the crate. Look, cried Fern, pointing. There's Henry. Don't shout, Fern, said her mother, and don't point. "Can't I please have some money?" said Fern. "Henry invited me to go to the Ferris wheel again. Only I don't think he has any money left, and he ran out of money." Mrs. Arbull opened her handbag. "Here," she said. "Here's 40 cents. Now, go on. Don't get lost. Be back here at our regular meeting place by the pig pen very soon." Fern raced off, ducking and dodging through the crowd as she went. She was looking for Henry. The Zuckerman pig was now being taken from his crate. The loud voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "Stand by for an announcement." Templeton crouched under the straw at the bottom of the crate. "What a lot of nonsense," muttered Giraffe. "What a lot of fuss about nothing." Over in the pig pen, silent and alone, Charlotte rested. Her two front legs were embracing her egg sac. Charlotte could hear everything that was being said on the loudspeaker, and the words gave her courage. This was her hour of triumph. As Wilbur came out of the crate, the crowd clapped and cheered, and Mr. Zuckerman took off his cap and bowed. Louvie pulled his big handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from the back of his neck. Avery knelt in the dirt by Wilbur's side, busily stroking him and showing off, and Mrs. Zuckerman and Mrs. Arbull stood on the running boards of the truck. "Ladies and gentlemen," the loudspeaker said, "we now present Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman's distinguished pig. The fame of this unique animal has spread to the far corners of the earth, attracting many valuable tourists to our great state. Many of you will recall that the never-to-be-forgotten day last summer when the writing appeared mysteriously on the spider's web in Mr. Zuckerman's barn, calling the attention of all and sundry to the fact that this pig was completely out of the ordinary. This miracle has never been fully explained, although learned men have visited the Zuckerman pig to study and observe the phenomenon. In the last analysis, we simply know we are dealing with supernatural forces here, and we should all feel proud and grateful. In the words of the spider's web, ladies and gentlemen, this is some pig." Wilbur blushed. He stood perfectly still and tried to look his best. "This magnificent animal," continued the loudspeaker, "is truly terrific. Look at him, ladies and gentlemen. Note the smoothness and the whiteness of the coat. Observe the spotless skin, the healthy pink glow of the ears and snout." It's the buttermilk," whispered Mr. Arbull to Mrs. Zuckerman. "Note the general radiance of this animal. Then remember the day when the word radiant appeared clearly in the web. Whence came this mysterious writing? Not from the spider. We can rest assured of that. Spiders are very clever at weaving their webs, but needless to say, spiders cannot write." "Oh, can't they?" murmured Charlotte to herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," continued the loudspeaker, "I must not take any more of your valuable time. On behalf of the governors of the fair, I have the honor of rewarding the special prize of $25 to Mr. Zuckerman, together with a handsome bronze medal suitably engraved, in the token of our appreciation of the part played by this pig, this radiant, this terrific, this humble pig, in attracting so many visitors to our great county fair." Wilbur had been feeling dizzy and got dizzier. This long complimentary speech was going on and on. When he heard the crowd begin to cheer and to clap again, he suddenly fainted away. His legs just collapsed, and his mind went blank, and he fell to the ground unconscious. "What's wrong?" asked the loudspeaker. "What's wrong? What's going on, Mr. Zuckerman? What's the trouble with your pig?" Avery was kneeling by Wilbur's head and stroking him. Mr. Zuckerman was dancing about, fanning him with his cap. "Oh, he's all right," cried Mr. Zuckerman. He gets these spells once in a while. He's so modest, he can't stand the praise." "Well, we can't give him a prize to a dead pig," said the loudspeaker. "It's never been done." "He isn't dead," said Mr. Zuckerman. "He's fainted. He gets embarrassed easily. Run for some water, Louvie." Louvie sprang from the judge's ring and disappeared. Templeton poked his head from the straw. He noticed that the end of Wilbur's tail was within reach, and Templeton grinned. "I'll tend to this," he chuckled. He took Wilbur's tail in his mouth and bit it just as hard as he could bite. The pain revived Wilbur in a flash, and he was back on his feet. "Ouch!" he screamed. "Hooray!" yelled the crowd. "He's up! The pig's up. Good work, Zuckerman. That's some pig. Everyone was delighted. Mr. Zuckerman was the most pleased of all. He sighed with relief. Nobody had seen Templeton. The rat had done his work so well. Here's a picture of Avery with Wilbur, and Templeton is biting his tail. Now one of the judges climbed into the ring with the prizes. He handed Mr. Zuckerman two $10 bills and a $5 bill, and then he tied the medal around Wilbur's neck, and then he shook hands with Mr. Zuckerman while Wilbur blushed. Avery put out his hand, and the judge shook his hands with him too, and the crowd cheered, and the photographer took Wilbur's picture. A great feeling of happiness swept over the Zuckerman family and the Arables. This was the greatest moment in the Mr. Zuckerman's life. He was deeply satisfied to win a prize in front of a lot of people. As Wilbur was being shoved back into the crate, Louvie came charging through the crowd carrying a pail of water. His eyes had a wild look. Without hesitating even for a second, he dashed the water at Wilbur, and in his excitement he missed his aim, and the water splashed all over Mr. Zuckerman and Avery, and they got soaking wet. "For goodness sakes," bellowed Mr. Zuckerman, who was really drenched. "What ails you, Louvie? Can't you see the pig's all right?" "You asked for water," said Louvie meekly. "I gave you water." I didn't ask for a shower bath," said Mr. Zuckerman. The crowd roared with laughter, and finally Mr. Zuckerman had to laugh too, and of course Avery was tickled to find himself so wet, and he immediately started to act like a clown. He pretended he was taking a shower bath. He made faces and danced around and rubbed imaginary soap under his armpits, and then he dried himself with an imaginary towel. "Avery, stop it," said his mother. "Stop showing off." But the crowd loved it. Avery heard nothing but the applause of the crowd. He liked being a clown in a ring with everybody watching him in front of a grandstand, and when he discovered there was still a little water left in the bottom of the pail, he raised the pail high in the air and dumped the water on himself and made faces to the crowd, and the children in the grandstand screamed with appreciation. At last, things began to calm down. Wilbur was loaded into the truck. Avery was led from the ring by his mother, placed in the seat in the back of the truck to dry off, and the truck, driven by Mr. Arable, crawled slowly back to the pig pen. Avery's wet trousers made a big wet spot on the seat. And that's the end of chapter 20, and we'll read 21 and 22, and I think that's the end of the storybook next time we read. I love you, grandkids. I love you very much. I hope you have a good day. I hope you enjoy serving the Lord and honoring Him. I'll read some more another day. Thank you. Bye.